Welcome to Extremely Valid Points.
We're three business owners and friends who enjoy talking about business, marketing, and creativity.
Along the way, we just might happen to make some extremely valid points.
So we'd love it if you would join us in today's conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Extremely Valid Points. We are your co-hosts. I'm Nathan Sala.
I'm Jenny Sala.
And I'm Dave Wilkins.
And today we're going to be doing part 2 of Bad Bosses. This is just a follow-up to the first conversation where we're going to talk about bad boss horror stories. So we're just going to, have fun. So in the first one, if you haven't seen that one, I would say go check it out. But in part 1, we talked about how people don't quit jobs. They quit bosses, right? And so I think that was a really fun conversation. And then we also talked about the difference between being a boss and being a leader and what that looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about horror stories. And the reason why we're talking about horror stories is I feel like in my personal life, my biggest and strongest convictions about how to be a leader and a boss have come from being the victim of bad bosses or bad management, being mismanaged, being mishandled, being misunderstood, not being appreciated, all those kinds of things. That's how I've learned the most about what kind of boss I want to be, is by watching other people screw it up.
Yeah, it's a great way to learn what not to do. Because sometimes when you have a bad boss, you just want to quit. And sometimes you can't quit or you shouldn't quit. And so you stick it out and you endure it. But I think the takeaway here and what we're hoping to encourage you all is that even if you are in a situation where there's a bad boss, you can still get something out of it and by learning what not to do.
True. And let's also just leave some room for grace for people who, because we all have to start somewhere, and sometimes we get thrown into leadership. And sometimes it's because we're the best at the job and the situation, but we still have a lot of areas where we need to grow, and none of us have arrived at becoming perfect by any means. Yeah. So we're not trying to rag on anybody or talk bad about anyone, but just have this conversation of how can we all be better.
That's good. Yeah. So do you guys have any horror stories, bad boss horror stories that you guys want to start with?
Horror stories is just such a extreme title that I feel a little bit afraid to share anything. But I think, Nathan, you might have a horror story or two.
I have at least one or two that I don't think calling them horror stories. Well, maybe it goes a little too far, but anyway, you be the judge. So when I was a teenager, I worked in the restaurant industry, and I had a boss who was horrible. And I think there were some, alleged substance abuse issues going on. But, if you are a teenager trying to do your job and you're trying to measure up to somebody who is high on cocaine, no amount of output that you produce is ever going to be good enough.
Let that be a lesson for you, kids.
Yeah. And so it was so bad, though, that I would have recurring nightmares. And so, and for years and years and years and years, and I haven't had one in probably maybe 10 years now, but it was at least once a year for a very long time where I would have a dream that I was still working there, and all these customers started coming, and it started getting busier and busier and busier, and I would get so stressed out, and everything would start falling apart, and it was basically a post-traumatic stress syndrome dream. I would wake up in a nightmare and thank God I still don't work there anymore. And so that's my horror story.
Yeah, that's got to be crazy when you can never measure up to that bar because it's an unrealistic expectation, right?
And I do think that's a common complaint I think people have when they have a bad boss, in quotation marks, is when people are mad at you because you haven't met expectations, but you don't really know what the expectations are. You haven't been properly trained. There hasn't been a standard created. And so you figure out what you're doing wrong when you do it wrong, rather than having this like introduction, well thought out training resources and materials, a person to teach you properly how to do things from the beginning. Sometimes we get thrown into situations and it's just like a stressful, busy place. And they're like, we don't have time to train you. You'll learn as you go.
Right.
And that's when you make mistakes. And then that's also when people get mad at you, is because you did something that you didn't know you shouldn't have, or you didn't know what to do in that situation, what the expectations were. So I would say a tip to pull from your horror story is to create expectations and standards, and really provide a lot of training and input to people. Also, give them grace when they don't hit the bar as they're learning and growing, and treat all of those opportunities as opportunities to provide more training and help people get better at what they're doing.
That's good.
Yeah, and speaking about that, I know I've seen some people where they're part of their employment strategy is like, say we're going to throw you in the deep end, which can be fine, but usually that is accompanied by, but we're also going to support you. We don't expect you to be perfect. We expect you to feel what the struggle is and see how you can kind of find your way to the surface. Mm-hmm. So the expectation is not that you're going to start swimming right away, or that you're going to be, just, walking on water here. It's that you're part of this learning process is finding that struggle, finding how to tread water, right? Mm-hmm. So that's fine, having situations where that people are going to struggle, but you have to make sure that the expectation is, I expect you to work at it, but I don't expect you to be perfect.
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. When I think about one of the most unpleasant places I've worked, I'm sure Nathan will remember, because I worked there for about 6 months and just had to leave. That's probably one of the shortest jobs I've had. But it was just a very negative place. And I think what was negative about it was there was a lot of things unspoken. And conflict and wasn't really properly addressed. So if you weren't meeting expectations, it wasn't communicated that you weren't. It was this passive aggressive type of management style, where you would feel like people are mad at you, but you might know why, but you're not exactly sure why. You just know for whatever reason they're not happy, and you don't really know how to fix it. You don't know why, and I think that is, a little bit of that I would call that management style would be, somebody who doesn't like conflict. When you're a leader, you have to deal with conflict, and there's definitely a right way to deal with it and a wrong way to deal with it. But not dealing with it really isn't an option, because problems aren't going to go away. People aren't going to know what's expected of them or be given the opportunity to improve or change if you're not communicating what your expectations are. And so most certainly communicating that in a way that's helpful and constructive. Again, like, I think so much of it has to do with giving people the benefit of the doubt and expecting the best in others, believing the best in others, and extending grace, and give people the opportunity to prove you wrong. Maybe you're right that, it could be there are employees from hell too, right? We could have employee horror stories. That would be a great episode too. And there are some that are just going to do the bare minimum and always be trying to push boundaries and always trying to be figuring out what they can get away with and how much they can get paid to do the least amount possible. But when you create opportunities for people to correct things, then it's a different conversation when they're not, once you've had that conversation, like, we need to fix this. This is what the expectations are, and you're not meeting them. How can we help you meet them? And then, after you've had that conversation, if it's still not happening, then it's a different conversation, right? Then it's disciplinary action or something else. But really not dealing with it or trying to get people to figure it out on their own is only going to create a kind of divisive, uncomfortable work environment that it's like contagious. It spreads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and it creates a very unpleasant place to work and to be.
Yeah, it reminds me, I've seen this meme floating around. It shows like a little girl on it, and it says, "I'm not bossy, I'm just a leader," or something like that. And sometimes I feel like I need to interject and say, no, wait, there's a difference between being a boss and a leader, and try and explain it, but then it's just, I get called misogynistic and all this other stuff.
Yeah, I was about to call you that. No, I'm kidding. No,
boy.
but I do think like women, that meme is really speaking about what it can be like to be a female and be a boss, and how sometimes when a woman has a certain leadership style or is in control, that they're perceived very differently than if a man was doing the exact same thing. And that's what I think the meme is about. But I do agree with you that boss and leader are two different things. There's no doubt about that.
So some of the things we were talking about kind of reminded me of a really great video. You can see it on YouTube, and it's called Dicks. Do I have to be one to be a great leader? And it's this series by a director, and he's working on his feature film. This is kind of like he's worked on a number of different things, but during the course of this first feature film that he worked on, he kind of felt like people were not taking him very seriously, but he noticed when he got tired and grumpy and more short with people were more responsive. And so he was just feeling like, is that the way that I have to act in order for people to take me seriously, get stuff done? And so he kind of, after that thing, made a very short documentary about what, this whole idea about what's, leadership, and, do you have to be this way to take charge? And it's very interesting. We can link to it here in the show notes. So I think the thing is, there's all kinds of leadership styles, right?
Right.
And thinking back to some of my past experiences, it wasn't that I had people that I felt were mean or intentionally, abusive or any of those things, but I found that people that just didn't have, we talk about, we don't know what the bar is. I felt like sometimes maybe the bar kept changing because they were trying to, maybe not through their own fault. I mean, just lacking a vision or whatever it was, they just hadn't dialed that in. And so it was hard because you were trying to find success as an employee, and, you'd put in good work, but then all of a sudden now we're going to deal with this crisis, and now we're going to move over here. And so it was just hard to measure for myself, am I performing well? Am I doing a good job? If I put all this energy in this one thing, and then all of a sudden we're going to put that on the shelf, and we're going to run hard in this direction. And it's just hard to feel successful or fulfilled in those kinds of environments.
I agree. And I think one thing that, I think about when I hear you share that story is how important it is to let people know when they're doing well and to provide them with that positive feedback. Because it is so important for us to feel rewarded in our work.
Mm-hmm.
Recognition and, letting people know how much you appreciate them, how much you value them. And that could look like telling them directly. It could look like talking them up to a client or letting them overhear you talk good about them to other people.
To the team, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and like those experiences, I wouldn't even expect the leader that I'm working with to have everything perfect and know. Like if we're going to change directions, I'm actually fine with that. I'm pretty flexible.
Sure. Right.
But I think the thing is to be honest with that and to say, to like you're saying, hey, you put a lot of work in this project. We decided we're going to change directions here, but all the work that you did here is valuable because it helped us to know that we need to move over this way. And I think it's providing context, providing that communication with everybody, and sitting down to say like, hey, we value experimentation. If that, maybe that's part of the culture, and if you're not sure, we're trying all kinds of things. We have a shotgun approach. We're not sure what's going to work, so everybody's supposed to contribute. And if your thing doesn't get selected, or if we change what you're doing, that's part of the process. Don't feel like you've just been spinning your wheels.
That's good. Yeah, I have been in a position before too, where leaders are always changing the target or always changing the strategy.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you feel, I think if you're not communicating that, what you're saying, that our strategy is we're going to try this. If that doesn't work, then we're going to try something else. And that's okay. And we're still moving forward. But to always be saying, oh, well, now we're doing this. Well, now we're doing that. And without communicating that this is part of our process and that it is making progress, it makes people feel kind of like, okay, well, they're going to change it again next week. And these standards are always changing and they're hard to keep up with. And then it makes you kind of not necessarily look like a great leader. Like you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, like literally, if you were following somebody like around in the mountains, if they were saying, hey, we're going to go explore all this area, and you'd be like, you could say like, okay, we went over to the lake and then we went up the mountain peak and then we went to the stream and then, but if it was like saying, I'm going to take you to point B, and then they were going all these different places and it wasn't very straight line, you'd kind of think, this person doesn't know where I don't want to follow them. They don't know where they're going. Why should I follow them? Versus somebody that says, hey, we're going to explore. We're going to go over. I'm not sure which way we're going to go. We're going to try a couple different things. That's the vision.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've heard it said that the leader's job is to get everybody on the team to rally around and say, here's where we're going, team.
Yeah.
Everybody, let's, lock arms and we're going to this destination. Here's the goal. And so the clarity of the vision is a key part of being a great leader.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, I mean, one, you have to have vision. You have to know what you're doing. And two, you have to be able to communicate that vision to your team so that they can get on board too, so they can take ownership of it. I mean, it's so important to feel like the work you're doing matters and you understand where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and last time we talked a little bit about John Maxwell's book, The 5 Levels of Leadership, and we actually we took our whole team through a course of it, and it was like a video course. It was really powerful. Mm-hmm. But basically, it's like there's 5 levels of being a great leader, and like you start at level 5, and that's the boss mentality. It's like, I have authority over you. You have to do what I tell you because I'm the boss. I'm in charge. Shut up. Do what I say.
Right.
You don't matter. I matter. And it's this whole leadership style. And then it goes up from there and like all the way up to level 5. I don't remember all the levels right now, but level 5 is like you are inspiring the people, you're serving them. You are inspiring them. They feel such a loyalty and connection to the cause and to who they are as a person because you hired the right people to begin with and to what the organization's actually doing that you don't even need to boss them around. You just like say, have at it, you right. Do what you were born to do, thrive, and I'm going to be back here clapping and cheering you on.
There's sort of that parallel to parenting too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, like when our kids are young,
yes,
there's this very binary thing that they need extrinsic reinforcement to say, do this, don't do that. And what we're trying to develop as leaders and as we try to parent them, we try to grow them so they have the intrinsic motivation of, I know that I want to act and behave this way because that's going to provide positive results.
Right. Yeah. The only time you should be bossy is with a toddler who's about to go to touch the stove or something like that.
Yeah.
Or if you are a prison yard worker, where you are dealing with inmates and criminals and some unfortunately wrongly accused and convicted people who they're there too. You got to be nice to some people anyway.
Yeah, but I mean that's why I think we buck against that is we feel like, well, I don't want to be treated like a toddler, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Or if you're in the mob. If you're in the mafia, then you gotta boss people around. So. Those are the only times it's appropriate to be a boss. But other than that, it's not a good thing to be a boss. It's a terrible leader to do that.
I think the message that bosses kind of convey is stay in line or get in trouble. Do this or else. And nobody, we all know that negative reinforcement is the worst type of reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is what we all want. We all want to hear, well done, good job, you're killing it, thank you. Those are the things that we work for. And people are way more motivated to do a good job when they know they're going to be rewarded than they are to do the bare minimum so that they don't get in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So one time I was, it wasn't a job that I had, but I was a volunteer at a nonprofit organization, and they hired an intern, and this intern started treating all of the volunteers badly, just mistreating the volunteers there.
How were they treating them badly?
Basically, I recognized right away it was a boss mentality. They were treating them like they were subservient underlings. So anytime you have like a paid staffer who's mistreating your volunteer base, and I think that just amounts to a misuse of power, no matter how you look at it. And so I think that's what was happening. And I had already gone through the John Maxwell training, so I was like, okay, boss, and it's just like, there was no grace. It was like, you need to be doing it this way, and it was like, you can just say, oh, there's a way to do it in a way that's encouraging and respectful, that these people are there on their own time to give of their own time. They're not being paid. And this intern was being paid. And it just, I quit within 3 days. I was gone within 3 days. And, and it sucked because we were doing a lot of good for a lot of people, and I loved doing it, but I was just like, I'm done. I'm out. I'm not staying here. So it was a hard point, but, and like you were saying earlier, it wasn't even this intern's fault. I just think that this person was sort of in this culture of like, I have boxes to check. I have a whole bunch of duties I have to fulfill. This is my job. And so I got to get my job done. And so just out of being focused, it was like, the intern was task oriented and not people oriented.
Yeah. That's a big thing right there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you nailed it.
It's
I
a
think,
cultural issue.
yeah. And I think I said this the first episode we did on bad bosses, but I'm going to say it again because I just think it's so important. If you don't love people or genuinely care about people, you probably shouldn't take a leadership role.
It's true.
If it's all about, getting things done rather than, taking care of, leading, guiding people, you're not going to create a great environment.
Right, exactly.
And it's not easy to like people. Some people are really hard to like and to love and to care about. And, one thing we've learned over the years is everybody has a story. If somebody's difficult to be around, there's probably a lot of backstory behind why they are that way and how they got to be that way. And a little bit of empathy can really go a long way. I'm not saying that you should put up with a bunch of crap. But when you seek to first understand a person and care for them and steward them and try to help them in any way you can first, then I just think that getting all of the tasks that you're trying to get done kind of follow, and if somebody knows that you genuinely care about them, they're going to care about you and they're going to care about doing their job better.
Yeah,
That's good.
good point.
Yeah. So I heard about this. Well, it's not really a quote, but it's information. And it basically goes something like this. If your org chart looks like a pyramid instead of a circle, you probably have too many bosses. And so basically the teaching is like the pyramid shaped company or org chart is an outdated model. It's like a relic of the past. And new org charts are circles. They're circular.
Or like a hub type?
Well,
thing?
it's
Or
like
how does that work?
so it's like, you always have to have leadership, but the leaders support each other. Everybody's accountable in their role. I'm accountable to my teammate to do that and get them the next phase of the process, and then they're accountable to deliver that to the customer. Then this person's accountable to follow up and make sure everything is great. And then it all goes around full circle to,
So everyone's accountable to each other.
Right. There's
It's like the circle of life.
it's the circle of trust. Yeah. So I don't know. It's hard to break away from that pyramid shaped org chart because it's just it's so ingrained from our society. And I think when they did all of the research on organizational development back in like the 40s and 50s, World War II era, it was like the Mad Men era. There weren't a lot of women in the workforce at that time, and so it was almost like this translated military structure.
Yeah.
To just to apply it here. Well, it works for troops.
Right.
Let's apply it to
So
employees.
and so for those people who may not know what you're talking about when you say pyramid org chart, the idea would be, there's a president, and then, there's some vice presidents under the president who reports to the president, and then there's some managers under the vice presidents, and they report to the vice presidents, but then they manage people, and the people have to report to the managers, and down it goes. And so there's, you have presidents, vice presidents, managers, lead teams, those kinds of things. And so if you're at the very bottom of the org chart, you probably don't ever talk to the president, right? And you only report to the person above you, who reports to the person above them. And that, I do think, can sometimes be, when you have that style of leadership, I think that is when there's a lot of maybe passive-aggressive types of things happening because, you don't know what kind of heat the manager's taking. Right. And so now the manager's in trouble because he is a bad boss, and so he's going to take it out on you.
So there's this old movie, The Prince of Egypt. It's a cartoon. Have you guys ever heard of that one?
Sure have. Yeah, DreamWorks.
There's this one part where a man is singing about the mountain, and he says, the stones that form the top of the mountain are not more important than the stones that form the base of the mountain, And it's sort of speaking to this idea that, if you have a job to play, no matter where you are in that organizational structure, there's a respect for everybody, a mutual respect, a mutual appreciation for hey, I might be a rock star at leading people and inspiring people to join my cause and follow my vision. But the role that you're hired for, even though you're brand new here and you're in the, kind of the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, you are a rock star at the role you serve in. And, so that needs to be appreciated.
Right. That's good. And if you're a Christian, a really great book on that is, or if you're not a Christian and you want to read a Christian book, it's called Culture of Honor. I think it might be Chris Valentin is the author. Yes, Chris Valentin, Culture of Honor, really wonderful book about what can happen when you respect everyone and understand the value that each person brings to an organization. Really great book. And definitely it can be used in a work environment, in a volunteer environment, in any environment, I think, where there's levels of leadership. Check it out.
Does anybody have anything inspirational to talk about?
I have a quote to share on the topic of leadership, and it's from Richard Branson. Train people well enough so they can leave. Treat them well enough so they don't want to.
That's good.
Yeah, that is very good.
Because as bosses, as leaders, sometimes we fear, what if our key employees get poached or go work for another place, and you invest all of these resources in training them, developing them, making them the best they can be. Mm-hmm. But this is saying, do that, and don't be afraid that they're going to leave, and then treat them so well that they'll never want to leave. And if they do leave and they're better off, that's a great, you have not done the world any disservice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good.
So we have a list of resources that you might find valuable if you are a leader or thinking about becoming a leader or want to become a better leader. Head over to our website and check out our show notes. We have some links to some great books and seminars and things like that. We'll link to the books we talked about today during our podcast, and also some more as well. And we think you'll find those really valuable. So head on over to extremelyvalidpoints.com and check it out.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of Extremely Valid Points. We would love to hear from you in the comments if you want to share your bad boss horror story. Just don't leave any, don't put anybody's names in there, please. But thank you guys for joining us. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for spending time with us at the Extremely Valid Points podcast. To learn more about this episode, see our show notes at extremelyvalidpoints.com. Be sure and subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you download your podcasts. Join us on Facebook at facebook.com/extremelyvalid. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram at EVP_podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time with some extremely valid points.